Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. It's been a while. It's been a minute, a few weeks. I am never one that's going to put out videos just for the sake of putting out videos that are dull and boring. And there was a bit of a down period there where you're post-free agency for the most part, but it's not quite the NFL draft. And so we're glad to be back. But yeah, it's been a few weeks. And with how Brian Gutekunst has navigated, most recently with this Dontavian Wicks trade to Philadelphia and collecting 2 draft picks, one this year and one next year, and the Rashawn Gary trade earlier in the offseason, and just how he's kind of putting the puzzle pieces together for Green Bay, I thought it'd be fun to jump on and sort of talk about the strategy. And the strategy really should surprise nobody. If you remember just 2 years ago, entering the 2024 NFL draft, the Green Bay Packers had 11 draft picks. And when Goody was asked about that entering the draft, he said, and I quote, "We have 11 right now. I'd love to end up with 13, 14, or more. I'd never shy away from that." Now, Green Bay, if you look at this thing over the course of the next 2 years, they have 8 draft picks entering this draft. And next year, as of this very moment, they have 11 again entering the 2027 NFL draft. Now, the interesting part within all of this is that this is the first time that the Green Bay Packers will enter an NFL draft without their own first-round pick since 1986. It's been 30 years. 96, 06, 16. 40 years. My math is off there. 96, 06. Yeah. 40 years since the Packers last entered an NFL draft. I was not a mathematician, without their own first-round pick. Now, the asterisk is that there were a couple of times under Ted Thompson where Green Bay traded out of the first round, but they still had a first-round pick entering the draft in 2017, and I believe the other occasion was 2008, where the Packers left those drafts without selecting a player in the first round. The difference, though, is that they had a first-round pick entering those drafts and just traded out of it. This year and next year, Green Bay does not have that luxury because of the Micah Parsons trade, and I still believe 10 times out of 10, even with the knowledge now that Micah Parsons, of course, tore his ACL against Denver, and he's going through the rehab process right now, likely to miss maybe 2, 3, 4 games to start this upcoming season. I still believe, heart of hearts, you make that trade 10 times out of 10. But this has to have Goody a little bit antsy and a little bit itchy because of his affinity for wanting to collect as many draft picks year in and year out. To not have a first rounder this year or next year, even though you got the generational talent, you got the blue chip player in Micah Parsons, it has to be eating a little bit at Goody. And so he is going about this thing knowing I don't have a first rounder this year, I don't have a first rounder next year, so I'm just going to accumulate as many picks as possible. Because if you look at how he's gone about this offseason in particular, it's setting Green Bay up for that positioning to have as many picks as possible in the next 2 drafts, not just this year. You go back to the Rashawn Gary trade, and I had a video earlier in the offseason before the trade even happened, and I was certainly not in the minority. I believe I was in the majority, where people kind of came to the conclusion that, Rashawn Gary didn't have a sack, a tackle for loss in the last, 9 games of the season, somewhere right around that mark. And early on in the season, there was a lot of production, and then it dipped off, and then Micah Parsons got hurt, and Rashawn Gary was the one who had the rallying cry where he had said after the loss to Denver in the game where they lost Micah Parsons as well, the rallying cry was, we're going to get this thing figured out. We're going to step up in Parsons' absence. We're going to do it for Micah Parsons. We're going to go do it for this team. We're going to do it for this defensive line. I'm slightly paraphrasing, so on and so forth from Rashawn Gary. And he never delivered. He just didn't. And you looked at the price tag and what he was going to count against Green Bay's salary cap for next year if they kept things as is, status quo with this contract, and it became abundantly apparent like Green Bay's going to have to figure something out with Rashawn Gary. Can they perhaps talk to him, restructure his contract, figure it out that way, bring him back for this 2026 season? Instead, they opt to trade him to the Cowboys for a 4th-round pick next year, instead of trying to restructure his deal. One thing was apparent. It was Green Bay can't bring him back. Wasn't it? It was like damn near $20 million of a salary cap hit to bring back Rashawn Gary if they didn't touch the contract for 2026. That was never going to happen. And so you kind of go down this road of, okay, they could try to restructure. He could be a cap casualty, or you could open up door 3, which is find a trade partner. And that's the door that Goody opted to walk through by trading Rashawn Gary to Dallas. But with where Green Bay's at, and believing they have a championship window that exists right now, sure, Rashawn Gary didn't put up the numbers, especially in the second half of the season, that you would have preferred if you're Matt LaFleur and Goody and then defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. And if you're a Packers fan, Rashawn Gary did not deliver in the way that you would have expected or hoped that he would have. But knowing that he's a veteran, that he's only ever played for Green Bay, and the sample size is large, it would have made sense to try to restructure the deal and bring him back, knowing that this is a team trying to capitalize on championship window, knowing that it's a team that once you trade away Rashawn Gary, you know you're going to be without Parsons for the first few weeks of the season. You also lose Kingsley Enagbari, and that was later down the road in free agency to the New York Jets. And all of a sudden, things look pretty thin when you talk about the pass rushing department, specifically on the edge for Green Bay. But Goody opted to cash in on a draft pick. And quite frankly, to get a fourth rounder, even though it's in 2027, for Rashawn Gary is a pretty good deal. But it's set in motion this idea that Goody's going to try to just stock up on draft picks. Because then we get to the Dontavian Wicks trade just a week ago, or I guess it depends on when you're watching this video. But the Packers trade Dontavian Wicks for, what was it, a fifth rounder this year and a sixth rounder next year. Dontavian Wicks is entering the final year of his rookie deal. Now, he got that one-year extension with Philadelphia, and that one-year extension was worth, wasn't it a shade over $12 million, if I'm not mistaken. Green Bay was never going to pony that money up for their fourth wide receiver on the depth chart. So from that aspect, sure, trade Dontavian Wicks, get something for him now. He gets to cash in on a one-year extension with Philadelphia. Philadelphia gets the safety net of having Dontavian Wicks in the building in case an A.J. Brown trade comes to fruition. And so it made sense for both sides. None of what I'm saying am I trying to insinuate that Goody made the wrong decisions along the way. I just find it fascinating that this is a team trying to capitalize now on what they're deeming to be a championship window, and they trade away a veteran in Rashawn Gary instead of trying to rework his contract. They trade away Dontavian Wicks, where you already lost Romeo Doubs to New England in free agency. Now you're trading Wicks to Philadelphia, and look, I love the trio. I love the trio of Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, and Jaden Reed. But you're an injury away there from wondering, what does the depth look like at wide receiver? You bring in Sky Moore on a one-year deal, but let's call a spade a spade. While Sky Moore will be listed as a wide receiver, he was brought in to be a kick returner and a punt returner. I'm going to pull it up because I was looking at Sky Moore's stats the other day. He hardly had any receptions the last 2 years combined. One was with Kansas City, and then last year with San Francisco. The last 2 seasons, Sky Moore has played 23 games. He has 5 total receptions. That's it. And so he's a wide receiver, by title, but he was brought in to be a returner. What's Bo Melton going to be? Cornerback, wide receiver, jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife. The plan was to have him be a full-time corner last year, make that switch, and then he got sprinkled in at wide receiver. You have Savion Williams, who I still like, third-round pick last year, seldom used as a rookie, dealt with injuries at the end of the year. Will he take the next step in his development to becoming, I don't want to say a crucial part, but a viable part within Matt LaFleur's offense? Point is, you lose Doubs. Bringing back Wicks and just letting him play out his last year of his rookie deal would have made sense for a team trying to capitalize now, which is what I keep circling back to. Instead, Goody looked around, said, I don't have a first-round pick this year. I don't have a first-round pick next year. I want more picks. And so he trades Wicks for a pick this year and a pick next year. And I don't think the Rashawn Gary trade was not surprising, or at least it shouldn't have been. The Wicks one shouldn't have been stunning, but it was a little bit surprising. But you look at Green Bay's wide receiver room and how it's forecasting. Christian Watson's due an extension. He's entering the last year of his deal. Jaden Reed is due an extension. He's entering the last year of his deal. Do they work out an extension with Reed? You would expect them to with Christian Watson, and maybe you would think, right? I'm assuming here, but before the season starts, you get something etched in stone with Christian Watson and Tucker Kraft. But there's a lot of uncertainty already with the wide receiver room. Now you're adding depth questions to it, and maybe Green Bay uses a 4th or 5th round pick on a wide receiver this year. We can, talk about that in a different video. But Goody is clearly going with the strategy of, I'm trying to stockpile as many draft picks as possible these next 2 years when we don't have a first round pick. And I found it very interesting after the Packers signed defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, and they signed Hargrave to hopefully shore up some things on the interior of the defensive line. A veteran, been around the block, played for a handful of teams, a lot of production throughout his career. And after they signed Hargrave in March, Goody was asked about it at the end of last month. I believe it was at the meetings they have down in Florida. It couldn't have been at the Combine. It was at the end of March. In Goody's quote, I found it very interesting. He said, talking about Hargrave, he's a complete player. We've lost a few guys in the defensive interior there, and we just needed to add something, particularly because he was released. It was not part of the compensatory formula. He just fit really well. It's that second to last part that you need to focus in on. We could talk about the Hargrave signing all we want, how much of an impact he's going to have as a veteran on the interior of the defensive line. But Goody adding in this part, again, this is a Goody quote, particularly because he was released, it was not part of the compensatory formula. Goody is looking ahead towards next year, and he's saying and seeing and thinking, okay, Malik Willis just signed that deal with Miami. That should be a fourth-round compensatory pick for us. Romeo Doubs just signed that deal with New England. That should be a fourth-round compensatory pick for us next year. Quay Walker just signed that deal with Las Vegas. That should be a fifth, so on and so forth. Now, you can only max out at 4, but you look at how Green Bay's navigated this offseason. They trade for Zaire Franklin. They sign Hargrave. They sign Benjamin St-Juste away from Washington, and he would normally count against it for Green Bay based on his deal, but because Rasheed Walker signed with Carolina, it cancels out. Green Bay should still get the 4. I'm forgetting the fourth that I'm missing. It was Malik Willis, Romeo Doubs, Quay Walker, and Kingsley Enagbare. Enagbare going to the Jets on the deal he did should net Green Bay a 6th-round compensatory pick next year. And so if those estimates are correct, and Green Bay gets a 4th for Willis, a 4th for Doubs, a 6th for Quay Walker, a 5th for Quay Walker, and a 6th for Kingsley Enagbare, it adds to already having a 4th in line because of the Rashawn Gary trade, a 6th next year in line already because of the Dontavian Wicks trade, and Green Bay right now should have 11 draft picks entering the draft next year. And so, to me, I could see it having become a case where Goody pulled the trigger on a massive decision in a massive trade last offseason, one that, quite frankly, I didn't know if he would ever make. He always had liked to say, we're always in the mix. We're always in the mix. That was always the phrase whenever a big name would pop up. But knowing how much he clutches on to draft picks and just how much he values them, I had doubts, I had reservations as to whether or not he would ever make the type of trade he ended up making, parting ways with Kenny Clark and 2 first-round picks for Micah Parsons. So to me, he gets credit, he gets kudos, he gets a tip of the cap, a pat on the back, whatever phrase you want to use for making that trade. He may have gotten a little itchy, a little antsy, and said, how can I make up ground for this? He wants these first-round picks, but he doesn't have one in either of the next 2 drafts. And so he's navigated this offseason looking towards this draft and really looking towards next year's draft to try to just accumulate quantity. That's the word, quantity. He wants to get as many draft picks as he possibly can these next 2 years because he and the Packers do not have a first-round pick the next 2 seasons. And so he looked at the Hargrave signing. He's like, great, veteran. We could use, some help on the interior of the defensive line. Can never have enough depth there. You love Devontae Wyatt, but can he stay healthy for a full season? You have some young pieces in there as well. A couple of those Georgia Bulldogs from last year, Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse, but one was a UDFA, one was Brinson's 6th, 7th round pick. And so you bring Hargrave in, and when he's talking about the addition, he couldn't help himself but to mention, hey, it also didn't count against the compensatory formula. Like, feel pretty good about that. And so that kind of, light bulb goes off above your head where you're like, oh, he's really, really focusing in on that because of the pieces of the puzzle they've lost this offseason with Willis, with Doubs, with Enagbare, with Rasheed Walker, with Quay Walker, so on and so forth. And he doesn't want to add players this offseason that'll count against that formula next offseason when they can cash in on those compensation picks. And so I like what Goody's done so far this offseason, I will say, for the most part. And he's adding some veterans that truly have some seasoning to them, right? It's not, Zaire Franklin's going to be 30 in July. What is St. Just? He's up there too because he's played quite a few years. Last year with the Chargers, Washington before that. He's going to be 29 in September. One of the things that we kind of wondered aloud is the Packers have been, boasting about having the youngest roster in the NFL the last 3 years, yet they haven't been able to cash in with having the youngest roster in the NFL the last 3 years, cash in to the point of reaching the mountaintop. And so Goody's kind of tinkering a little bit. You're adding a guy, inside linebacker in Franklin who's going to be 30, St. Just who's going to be 29 in September. What is Hargrave? I don't want to say he's up there because they're young, but Hargrave's definitely in his 30s. Hargrave's turned 33 in February. And so I don't know if the Packers will have the youngest roster, but I don't really give a damn about that. All we give a damn about is the wins. And Goody's tinkering with the formula both in respects to bringing in some veterans who have played for quite a long time in the NFL, which typically, Green Bay has this rule that obviously is not set in stone and they never speak about, but with how they operate, we know once a player hits 30, they're typically out on said player. But they're bringing in players who have reached that threshold and gone over that threshold so far this offseason at multiple positions or are getting close to that threshold where normally they wouldn't operate business in such a way. And so Goody is definitely stepped outside his comfort zone with the Micah Parsons trade last year because of the magnitude of the trade and what he had to part with. And he's stepping outside his comfort zone now again this offseason with who he has added and the age of those players. But he's making sure that Green Bay is lined up to have plenty of draft picks. Now, I'm just thinking about, so next year, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but is it correct, folks, that next year Green Bay, because as of right now, if the compensation picks work out according to how we believe they will, Green Bay would have its own fourth-round pick. It would have the fourth-rounder from Dallas for the Rashawn Gary trade. It would have the fourth-rounder, the compensation pick for losing Malik Willis to Miami, and another fourth-rounder for Romeo Doubs leaving in free agency for New England. That'd be 4 fourth-round picks, if I'm not mistaken, next year for Green Bay. And so I don't mind Goody doing this because there's no way, even though you landed Micah Parsons, there's no way he's comfortable not having a first-round pick the next 2 years. And so instead of saying, we can bring Wicks back and then probably watch him walk, but we're bringing him back for the last year of his rookie deal because he's a vital depth piece. And when he wasn't the number 4, when he had to be the number 3 or the number 2 because of injuries elsewhere at wide receiver, he stepped up. He was fine in that role. And so if Green Bay had brought back Dontavian Wicks, nobody bats an eye. If they had restructured Rashawn Gary's contract and brought him back at a much cheaper price, nobody would have batted an eye. Instead, Goody's cashing in and bringing back more draft picks, and that word quantity is what he's aiming at. Again, I'll finish with how I started. 2024, nobody entered the draft with more picks than Green Bay, who had 11. And Goody said, and I quote, "We have 11 right now. I'd love to end up with 13, 14 or more. I'd never shy away from that," end quote. He has 8 right now. And you can bet your bottom that he's probably going to move around the draft, whether that's moving back, moving up, likely moving back in some spots to accumulate more and more picks, because he has 8 right now entering this draft and 11 entering the draft next year at this moment. And so it's the quantity route for Green Bay and Goody, and I don't blame him. Let me know what you guys and gals think. I'm always appreciative for all the support. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already as we build this thing up. We'll see you next time.